What's up, metalheads? Welcome to the Scrap Metal Podcast, the show for the misfits who've been listening to the same music since high school. I'm your host, John von Frankenstein, and joining me today is my metal thrashing mad co-host, Chris. Chris, I gotta ask you, man, how you feeling?
I gotta say, I'm feeling idle.
Feeling idle? Billy Idol? The rebel, yeah! Does this feeling of idolatry? Idleness? There's some trouble there. I don't know. It's the devil's playground and all that stuff. Does this have anything to do with how you're keeping your heavy metal street cred?
You know, it just might have something to do with my heavy metal street cred, because I've been listening to the new Kerry King song, Idle Hands.
Okay.
Yeah, it's he announced that the new album, From Hell I Rise, is coming out in May, and as of this recording, a few weeks ago came out with the first song, Idle Hands, and it's pretty good. It definitely sounds like Slayer because it's Kerry King writing it. It's Kerry King's guitar tone, and so a lot of it very much sounds like Slayer. But it was weird. There was a guitar riff that played that reminded me of a guitar riff from World Painted Blood.
Uh-huh.
And it was really weird to hear this Slayer riff and then not Tom Araya. So that was kind of weird, but the song was still pretty good. The lyrics are, the chorus I think is idle hands do the devil's work. It is very much classic Kerry King, anti-religion, anti-Christianity. But in revealing the song and revealing the name of the album, he also revealed who's in the band. So obviously you got Kerry King. On drums, you have Slayer drummer Paul Bostaph. So that was really the one member everyone was like, this dude is definitely in it. And I feel like even like a while ago, Kerry was like, oh yeah, Paul Bostaph is in this. Like he's a part of it. On bass, you have Kyle Sanders from Hell Yeah. On guitar, you have Phil Demmel from Violence and Machine Head. Phil had also filled in for Gary Holt at some point in Slayer because Gary Holt needed to go play with Exodus, and Phil stepped in for like 4 shows.
Phil Demmel fucking shreds.
Yeah.
I love that dude. Yeah, I've been following him since Machine Head. And I was really happy to see his involvement there.
Yeah, he definitely sounded good. I know, much like classic Slayer, in the lyrics, it showed who was playing which lead. And I do remember Phil's lead sounding really good, went really well with Kerry's playing style, so that was really cool. And then on vocals, lead singer Mark Asagueda from Death Angel. Not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but he sounded good. Like I said, it was weird to hear a Slayer song with Slayer-sounding guitars and Slayer-sounding drums and not Tom Araya, but Mark did sound great. Death Angel is great. I think I've seen Death Angel live. I don't remember when I would have seen them, but yeah, he sounded great, and I know he's a great singer from Death Angel, so yeah, I've just been listening to this song and really enjoying it and looking forward to the whole album. I know Kerry King said in some interviews that it includes some things that he wrote while writing Repentless and was like, I'll save these for the next Slayer album. And there wasn't another Slayer album. So he's like, well, I've got all this music. I need to put it out in the world. I'm just going to form my own band. So that's what I've been doing. I mean,
good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him. Like, as much as we rag on Kerry King and as much as we call him like the eternal party pooper and all that, I can't blame him for feeling some bitterness towards the fact that his vehicle for musical expression was cut short, way shorter than he expected it to.
Yep.
And I can see where some of the anger is coming from. I can definitely understand why he's so bitter that Slayer was done.
Yeah.
But it's the thing, as always with Kerry King, there's something I can't agree with, is him just like ragging on the band.
Yeah.
And like talking about how like, no, I don't talk to any of the guys anymore, and like I don't talk to Tom Araya anymore, and this and that, and like it seems so weird to me. You spent so long creating one of the most influential bands in all of metal.
Yeah.
It's part of the big four, and he would walk away from that, where it's like, I think you've brought it up in the past, where Slayer always felt more like they were coworkers than bandmates, you know?
Yeah.
Or I guess after a certain amount of time and having lost a founding member, I can understand why they would feel that way.
Yeah, I know before World Painted Blood and Tom Araya needed to get his surgery, and there's an interview from Tom where they ask him, "Hey, have you heard from Kerry and Jeff?" And he's like, "No." And he was like, "But that's not weird.
Yeah.
It's not weird that I haven't heard from those guys because that's just the relationship we have now."
Yeah.
And I think that they didn't start out that way.
Right.
But over time, the only member of the band that was ever changing was the drummer. So it was the same three guys in the band from the start right up until Jeff Hanneman passed away. So I can understand these guys getting sick of each other. And when you spend that much time together, it's going to happen. And I think, eventually they were spending I would imagine they were spending too much time together. And we're like, you know what? We're better off staying apart. We don't have to be friends outside of recording and touring. But
let's just call it what it is.
But some of the things, and someone tried comparing Kerry King to Dave Mustaine, I think, in the way they were looking at it from Kerry King's perspective, at least, was that he's not trying to shit on people. He's just talking. And because he keeps talking, he eventually says something stupid. Yeah. Because he says, the thing, "Oh, Dave Lombardo is dead to me." It's like, you're kind of the one who was a jerk to Dave, and I'm sure whatever. And then and then it also comes out, "Oh, I've been playing bass on all the Slayer records for the past 15 years. The second half of our career, I played bass. Tom didn't play a single bass line on the record." It's like, why are you bringing that up now? But it's just he's just
taking shots.
He just keeps talking and saying things, and it's gonna get people mad because it's like he has diarrhea of the mouth and just keeps saying things until something stupid comes out of his mouth, and people post that quote.
Yeah.
So
he just gives way too much ammunition to the people.
Exactly.
So I have been keeping my heavy metal street cred by revisiting the comedic classic Joe Dirt. I love this movie. I love this movie so fucking much. And, my brother and I would quote it constantly growing up. And there's one part in particular that has always stuck with me. Always. There's a scene where Joe is talking about all the bands that he loves. And he makes mention of Van Halen, but not Van Hagar. And that's an argument that's very, very close to my heart. And any fan of the Scrap Metal podcast knows that we love a good head-to-head episode.
Yep.
And that's what we're talking about today. Van Halen versus Van Hagar. We are diving into the two iconic frontmen from this seminal band that just partied it up in the earlier part of their career and then wrote songs to make Sweet Sweet Love to in the latter half. And we're going to try to see if my opinion will change because, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but I am firmly in camp David Lee Roth. I am camp Van Halen, not Van Hagar. How do you feel?
First, I have to say it's hilarious that you bring up Joe Dirt because I also had that in my notes as the first time I remember hearing the phrase Van Hagar is fucking David Spade. I remember that. And I remember him having a septic tank strapped to his back that he thought was a nuke because someone slapped a biohazard sticker on it.
Yeah.
And those are the two things I remember about Joe Dirt.
I got the poop on me.
But I know I am more of a fan of David Lee Roth, and I am more of a fan of that era of Van Halen. But I've talked about in the past my classic rock foundation I got from my parents. And, my dad who listens to Van Halen growing up, didn't really have a preference. And if anything, I think he's more of a Van Hagar type of guy.
Really?
Yeah. So like growing up, the only albums I had were 1984 and 5150. So I'm hearing Jump and Dreams in the Power Rangers soundtrack. And that's my first exposure to Van Halen. So it's two different lead singers, but two songs that have keyboards and synth sounds. And so my thought of this band wasn't so much like who's the lead singer. Like it was almost just more of like, okay, this is a band that just like is hard rock, but also relies heavily on like keyboards. Yeah. And so it was a weird introduction to the band. And like I said, as time has gone on, I definitely prefer David Lee Roth era Van Halen. But I also really enjoy a lot of Sammy Hagar Van Halen songs.
Yeah. It's really funny that you mention like having a lot of exposure to the Van Hagar era. Because I remember growing up, too, my dad had Van Halen 2, 1984, and 5150, and Balance, I think is the album, with the two conjoined twins on the seesaw.
Yeah.
And I remember throwing on 5150 and being like, now this is like as a teenager. I'm like 11 or 12. I remember throwing it on and being like, this sounds different. This seems weird.
Yeah.
And looking at the liner notes or like, the booklet and being like, where's David Lee Roth? What is this? And I never listened to it again. So this is ages ago. So even before Joe Dirt had the opportunity to sway my mind and sway my opinion, I was very firmly in Camp Van Halen. And it is important to make the distinction that we're going to be talking about mostly the lead singers, the two lead singers, although there are three, but we're not going to talk about Gary Cherone because we don't have time for that. I love Gary Cherone. Listen, I love Extreme. I'm going to say it now because one of my arguments that will come up later is going to go against this, but I love corny, cheesy hair metal. I love a good power ballad. We have 2 whole episodes about it where I've, dived into that, where we dove into that, but it's we're talking about the eras as the different feel in singers, and I did my best. I don't know if you had to like restrain yourself too, but I'm doing my best to not talk about Eddie Van Halen throughout this episode because I could I could spend a whole lot of time talking about how great Eddie Van Halen is, but it was more so the distinction between the two very, very different singers. So let's get into the different eras of Van Halen, right? The David Lee Roth era, the debut era, up until his departure, was from 1978 until 1984. So that's where those records drop. Van Halen 1 comes out, and it is this party rock, bombastic kind of record that really, again, making slight mention of Eddie Van Halen, it changed the face of guitar because there's guitar before Van Halen and there's guitar after. But that's how iconic this first album was. And a lot of what helped propel Van Halen in the early days, in my opinion, was the fact that you had a frontman who was so over the top and had these vocal pyrotechnics to match the feel of the guitar. And one of the things that I've always really loved about early Van Halen, Chris, let me know if you agree, is that the band just sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like a party. In speaking with, a few other people, it just sounds like a couple of dudes just hanging out, being dickheads. Like it just sounds like a really good time. Do you feel like that's an accurate description of this early era of Van Halen?
Yeah, absolutely. I know even before we had this discussion, I know you included it, but David Lee Roth is a front man. He is out there to entertain. Yeah. He is out there to have fun. He wants to make sure you're having fun. He wants the band to have fun. And it was a party. And like you're saying, I think it's hard not to talk about Eddie Van Halen because it did feel like at times the vocals were secondary.
Yeah.
The show was Eddie Van Halen playing like a fucking madman,
Yeah.
David Lee Roth jumping around like a madman. Like there's a reason David Lee Roth was then parodied as Dr. Roxo, the rock and roll clown in Metalocalypse, who was addicted to cocaine and jumped around and danced around just like David Lee Roth. And yeah, that era of the band, and I think that's why I love that era of the band, is that it was a rock band that was about having fun, playing cool riffs, jumping around, yelling, like just... We'll continue to talk about it, but David Lee Roth, just his ad-libs and his his oohs and his woes and his ahs and just like just randomly making noises, but it's so much fun. And so that era of the band is just about having fun while listening to this hard rock music.
Yeah, that era... The era brings a visible smile to my face. It really does make me so happy talking about that early era of Van Halen. And so, like, from my early experience with them, I grew up listening to those albums and being just floored by, like you said, the showmanship and how you can there's such a live element to those albums that you can picture in your head these guys just running around the entire stage. And something that I always loved in songs like Hot for Teacher and songs like Ice Cream Man and songs like I'm the One, the parts where they're doing like the little gang vocals where like they're singing all together.
Yeah.
And like you can hear them cracking up. You can hear them laughing during the take, and that's on the record. That just, it embodies exactly that. You're having a good time. They're brash. They're in your face. They're probably the guys that you would get annoyed by at the bar because they're having such a good time. You know what I mean? They're enjoying themselves so much that it's almost an annoyance. And David Lee Roth really just embodied that. And he had such an over-the-top delivery that he really was a showman first, where Sammy Hagar was a singer, a well-established singer in his own right before even joining Van Halen. He joined in for the album 5150, which came out in 1986, and his tenure with Van Halen lasted from 1986 to 1995. That's a pretty good stretch of time.
Yeah.
But there was a notable shift in the style of music. Now, by the time Van Halen got to 1984, you could hear that they had a lot more of the power ballads and a lot more of the synthesizer, and Eddie's, wanting to bring the synthesizer into Van Halen a lot more, was already creeping up. It was already present in 1984. Songs like Jump, songs like, not Dancing in the Street, but Dance the Night Away, feels like a very different Van Halen from what had come before.
Even on 1984, there's the song "I'll Wait," which is that could very easily be a Van Hagar song. Like that's written in a style that 5150 was written in.
Yeah, for sure. But there's still just something about it and the delivery that feels great. So Sammy Hagar's era with the band, a lot of it had to do with the power ballads. You still had, I don't want to say that Sammy is a bad vocalist or is a subpar vocalist in comparison to David Lee Roth, because to be honest, between the two of them, he's the better singer.
Yeah.
In strides, like by miles, he's the better singer. The fact that he can still sing like that to this day is a testament to how much better of a singer he is in comparison to David Lee Roth. But he didn't have the showmanship that David Lee Roth had. And, he already had himself established. One of the notes that I made was that his song, I Can't Drive 55, to me, it sounded like someone was like a composer on a movie was tasked with making a song about like cruising in your car and being too cool for school. Like, think of that one rock song in the animated Transformers movie from the 80s. And that's what I Can't Drive 55, Sammy Hagar has always sounded like to me. It's like some movie executive's interpretation of what rock and roll is. And it just, not that it seems false, but there's just something about it that did not appeal to me. But because Sammy's such a good songwriter, and because Sammy was so good at writing these hooks that really grabbed you, you saw the band gain popularity with way more people than they had before Sammy's tenure with the band. And I think before that, it was fans of hard rock were fans of Van Halen because of that feel, because of that in-your-face feel. And they loved loud, fast, crazy rock music. With Sammy Hagar, largely thanks to MTV, it was the hooks, it was the ballads, it was the sweetness, it was the way that he sang. And that's what I really think distinguishes the two eras of the band. They were relying way more on their songwriting and way more on the hooks when Sammy came around. Chris, would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. Like you're saying, Sammy had a successful solo career before joining Van Halen, and it was very much like pop rock music. It was rock music that was catchy. It was choruses that would get stuck in your head. It was something that the audience could just sing along to and have fun in a different way. You know, David Lee Roth is the entertainment because he's David Lee Roth. He's up there just being entertaining. Where Sammy Hagar, Sammy Hagar very much wants to entertain you with the music. He's not up there to jump around. He's not up there to do splits and wear tassels and like run sprints across the stage. That's not what he's there to do. He's there to write fun rock music that you can dance to and sing along to. And the music is the show for Sammy, where it's almost like not to make David Lee Roth sound like it's almost like David Lee Roth is the show, but not in like a selfish or like a oh look at me kind of way, and just a this is how I want to be a clown. I want to be I want, it's you said something before, and there's times where it's like you can almost hear that David Lee Roth is smiling while he's singing the music. Yeah. Like he is having so much fun singing these songs or performing these songs. And it's almost like Sammy maybe had a little bit more professionalism about him in that he's trying to be a professional entertainer in that the music is the entertainment. You can be entertained by me, but I want you to be entertained by the music. Yeah. Where Dave is just like, no, I'll be a fucking clown. I just want everyone to have fun. And whatever makes it fun for you, that's what I'll do. Yeah. Yeah. It's Jim Carrey versus Daniel Day-Lewis. It's someone. That's what it is. Both geniuses in their own right. But Daniel Day-Lewis or Sammy Hagar is so serious about it and so fucking method with it. And Jim Carrey's like, here's a fart joke. I'm talking with my ass cheeks. This is going to be fun for everyone. So to really try to break down the two singers, right? I wanted to kind of get like first impressions of what their first appearances were like. So what I mean by that is like let's throw on the very first song where they each appear. So to give Sammy credit, right? Sammy came in to a well-established band having to, I don't know if prove himself is what I want to go with, but having to make a statement. So the song Good Enough off of 5150 starts out with Sammy's best Big Bopper impression and almost felt like a dig at David Lee Roth. It's just the big, hello, baby. And I have in my notes here at the very fucking top, first note, from his introduction, Sammy Hagar has pissed me off. Because it's so different from the brashness that we're used to with David Lee Roth. But he is throwing those vocal pyrotechnics, and like I said, his technique is immaculate. He really is a great singer. He reminded me a lot of David Coverdale
and I fucking love Whitesnake. But when I throw on Van Halen, I want to hear Van Halen.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting to hear fucking David Coverdale on a Van Halen song.
Yeah.
And that's where I was like, all right, already this feels a little different. But it was a lot of Sammy showing off his range, showing off that he can also do these like yelps and blips and stuff like that David Lee Roth used to do, but they were cleaner. They were a little bit cleaner and executed a little bit better. He's not hitting sour notes the way that Dave would often hit sour notes, but it almost made you feel like Dave was human by hearing that. The musicianship didn't change in any of the song in Good Enough, but it was just that. It was just good enough. It was good enough to pass. It was good enough to be like, all right, fine. And like, there's a vocal break that I noted down here. It sounded like Sammy trying to do like what do you think the teacher's going to look like this year? Or the one break coming up. Like, it felt like that. And I'm like, no, Sammy. Like, I don't want to hear you being a goofball. Give me, it's Sammy's our stepdad. Sammy is your stepdad, who you're like, no, I don't want to hang out with you on the weekend, pal. I don't want to go to the fucking ice cream shop with you, buddy. Like, I want to go visit my fucking dad. Yeah, he drives drunk. Yeah, he let me smoke fucking cigarettes, but that's why I fucking love him. Like, that's what it's like. I'm just nailing it with the fucking analogies here today. The spirit of David Lee Roth is running through me, and I'm feeling all types of sassy. Chris, did you dive into this song in the way that I did?
So I did listen to it, and I listened to it a couple times, and I see a lot of what you're talking about, and it almost made me think of some of the conversations we've had about Iron Maiden, and even similar, something that I feel like we briefly touched on with the Misfits, is that it almost felt like with the Misfits, Jerry only wanted Michael Graves to do a Danzig impression.
Right.
You know, Iron Maiden, Steve Harris was like, Blaze, you got to sing like Bruce. Yeah. And Blaze is like, but I can't.
Yeah.
And Steve Harris is like, well, too fucking bad. Do it. And
that's what I fucking paid you for, buddy.
And so that's what it almost felt like with Good Enough, is that I'll admit, I don't listen to a lot of Sammy Hagar's music before he was in Van Halen, so I don't know how much of it he did, but there was some of it that felt like, oh yeah, Dave would add some like oohs and ahs and yells in here, so you got to do the same thing, and Sammy's like, what? Like, that's not what he does. And so it did almost feel like trying to recapture what made people love David Lee Roth and do it with Sammy Hagar. And that's kind of why it didn't work for a lot of people, because the best songs with Sammy Hagar, in my opinion, are the songs that sound nothing like David Lee Roth, Van Halen, because no one else can replace David Lee Roth. Like, that's that style. The best songs, the best Van Hagar songs, are the songs that rely on synths and electronic sounds and keyboard sounds. Those are the songs that I really like. A song like Dreams, songs like Love Walks In, that are very, electronic sound and very like radio-friendly rock music and catchy choruses, because that's what Sammy Hagar is good at. And no, it's not what you're looking for from Van Halen, and Eddie throws in his phenomenal guitar solos in these songs, but the rest of the song does not sound like the Van Halen that a lot of people fell in love with during the David Lee Roth era. So there are times where it sounded like they were like, oh, Sammy, you got to do your best David Lee Roth impression to keep the fans around.
Yeah.
And to counteract that, Eddie is also going to write these very hooky, very catchy pop rock songs that you can showcase your ability to sing on. And it's similar to discussions we've had about Anthrax and Cannibal Corpse, where the music, the songwriting, was then written in a different way to best showcase the lead singers.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. They were writing to the strengths of the individual singer. And they were writing in response to the chemistry that they had with that particular frontman. So I think Sammy being such a strong songwriter just lent to Eddie's desire to have more of those commercial sounding synth pop kind of, I don't want to call it synth pop. That's a stretch.
Yeah.
But the poppier synth ballads that they had with with Sammy Hagar, like a song like Right Now.
Yeah.
I fucking hate that song.
Oh my God. I fucking love Right Now.
Dude.
I love that song, dude. I was so excited. I'm going to name drop her again. Elizabeth of the charismatic voice just reacted to it like a few weeks ago. I was so excited. Man. It's so good. I fucking love that song, dude.
I don't know what it is. It's just... there's just something about it that falls flat for me. There really is. And, you know, I lament the fact that I didn't have, that I was already familiar with Running with the Devil, because I do feel like it's somewhat of an unfair battle. I am glad that at least throughout the research put into this episode, I was able to say, like, okay, I gotta admit, Sammy's a good singer. He knows what he's doing. He's a good songwriter. And I wanted to give credit where credit was due, but obviously I'm falling into fucking Camp Dave, like, hard. You know, it's who I grew up with. All of my favorite Van Halen stuff was just the guitar pyrotechnics and Dave just being a fucking just batshit crazy frontman. And like, I love that we have the isolated track for Running with the Devil and that it's been memed so many fucking times of just the all his fucking yells and boops and then, fucking everything that he's doing on that song is so over the top. But even being familiar with the song, there was just a different reaction with me throwing that on, and you just hear the synth fucking slowing down and tracking down, and in comes fucking Michael Anthony with the bass.
Yeah.
Gunk, 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 gunk. Oh, he's another one I have to give, like, I don't think he's underrated, but we don't talk about him enough. His harmonies, the high notes that he hits, and just his bass groove, and having to be the left speaker to Eddie's right speaker, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Having to hold his own sonically and taking up enough of that sonic space. We talked about it in our Power Trios episode, how important it is to be able to hold something down when you've got a guitarist that's that out front.
Yeah.
To be able to hold something down on bass, to hold your own in that sense. And Michael Anthony does that in spades.
Oh, yeah.
But what I like about the slower pace of Running with the Devil is that it gives you the sleaze and that greasiness that the David Lee Roth era of Van Halen does so well, and it's so laid back and in the pocket. And I think that if Dave were to have said to himself, you know what, I want to be a crooner, I want to be a more soulful singer, at least with this song, you could have seen where that was going.
Yeah.
Like, you could have justified that and said, like, oh, okay, he can actually really sing. And he's like laying into some notes with a little bit more soul. There's the line, got no love to call real. Like that little bluesy note on Call is so fucking like greasy and like slinky. The way he slips into it, and it's that blues note that he hits. Oh, it's so good. It is so good. And then when it has to get ramped up, you hear the fucking like tassels on his pants flying and shit, you know? Like, you can feel it. I think I wrote in my notes, you can imagine he recorded this performance while in full splits, tassels on his pants, and doing jumping jacks. Like, that's what it sounds like. But that's what I love about them. That's really what I love about this band. And like I said, as a guitarist, it's hard not to be like, yeah, but Eddie. But I think it's in the same way that Michael Anthony had to hold his own being in a band with Eddie Van Halen, and Alex was such a good match to Eddie's energy and Eddie's sound, just how big the drums sound on their records. David Lee Roth had to do the same exact thing. He had to match the intensity of each one of these musicians. They were really a powerhouse.
Yeah.
Like it's so apparent, especially on this first album, just how great it must have been to see them in those early club days.
Yeah.
I am sure I would have been blown away if I saw them, when they were first starting out.
Yeah, definitely. And like you're saying, starting off with Running with the Devil, that's the first time anyone is hearing Van Halen. That's the first thing you're hearing. And what was interesting for me is, like I said, the only Van Halen I grew up with was 1984 and 5150. So I was like in college when I finally bought Van Halen 1 and Diver Down on my own. And I listened to Van Halen 1, and you start with Running with the Devil. You got Eruption, which I've heard before, going into You Really Got Me. And then you had Ain't Talking About Love. Those are all songs I'd heard on the radio already.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd never heard I'm the One before.
Oh, yeah.
And I hear that, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And this song showcases what Van Halen's all about, because you have Dave doing his thing. You have Eddie doing his thing, the Michael Anthony harmonies and bass. This is a song.
So good.
This is a song that showcases, because like we've talked about before, sometimes bands will make a choice. I think I've talked about it with Pantera. Obviously, there was only one guitar player in Dimebag in Pantera, but on the album, he would record a rhythm and a lead, or sometimes just a lead, and you would have Rex's bass playing. I'm the One doesn't have a rhythm guitar. It only has Michael Anthony's bass and Eddie doing whatever the fuck Eddie is doing on the guitar. Yeah. And like you're saying, Michael Anthony holds his own as a bass player and as a backup singer with the harmonies. I have like vivid memories of when it was announced Michael Anthony is being replaced by Wolfgang Van Halen.
Yeah.
And the thing that I heard from my dad, and I believe from Eddie Trunk, what about his bass playing and backup singing? Like that is just as important as Eddie Van Halen is, as Alex Van Halen is, honestly, as David Lee Roth is. And listening to I'm the One, like I said, it's fast paced. It does a lot of things I love about Van Halen, including having a barbershop quartet section. Which I fucking love. Like, I love that. And it's, again, that's a time when I'm listening to it and I'm like, you can hear that David Lee Roth is smiling and probably laughing in between takes as he's going like, ba-ba-da, shooby-doo-wah. Like, it's so silly and so much fun. And it's fun to see that on the first album, because I know by the time we get to Diver Down, which I know Eddie was disappointed in because half the album is covers. Yeah. But one of the covers is Happy Trails, which it's Dave and Michael Anthony singing, and it sounds great. Like they harmonize great together. And as much as we're saying Sammy is a better singer than Dave is, Dave could hold his own. And I think part of the charm was that he wasn't that good. Like, he wasn't quite that good, which made it a little bit more fun. Like, if he's perfectly in tune, then it's just kind of like, what the fuck are these guys doing? But if he's a little bit out of tune, it's like, oh, they're just having fun. And I think that's part of the charm behind Dave, is that he's not hitting the notes perfectly, and that's kind of what makes it fun. Yeah.
It's like having I keep seeing this tweet where it's like, please, for the love of God, just put a regular person in the Olympics to just showcase just how impressive these Olympians are. That's David Lee Roth. He's just the regular guy doing his best. And a song like I'm the One is just it sounds like fun. It sounds like so much is going on, and it just, you're right, it showcases exactly what makes that era of Van Halen so good. And like we've talked about just how soulful Sammy Hagar could get and just how good he was on their ballads. But I feel like we constantly hear about how bad of a singer David Lee Roth is, but it was because he was just a regular guy. Yeah. There is more earnestness maybe to his performances. That's like, On a song like Women in Love, great fucking song. One of my favorite songs from Van Halen. Great guitar intro. And then it just goes into the ba-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, great fucking rhythm. Then in comes the verse. The first note he hits, much. It's like, it's all over the place. Yep. But the way he's singing in it, you know, it feels like loving you is just a crazy dream. Like, he is the guy at the wedding that's had like one too many old fashions, and then he's now out on the dance floor like serenading, you know, one of the bridesmaids, and you're like, he's got a chance tonight. I think he's gonna do it. And there's just that. I think that's his regular guy appeal is what's so good. And then I think what my problem is that I found myself bored listening to a lot of the Van Hagar era, because obviously I'm super familiar with the David Lee Roth era, but that's why I wanted to dive into, you know, OU812, 5150, like all these other albums that people love.
Yeah.
I felt like the outsider being like, why can't I connect with this? But it was this feeling of boredom that I was getting of like, well, yeah, this kind of reminds me of early Van Halen, but I don't know. I don't want to listen to that. I'll just go back and listen to the early stuff.
Exactly.
I don't want to hear you doing your best Van Halen. I want to hear Van Halen. Like a song in our first time listens section. I wanted to just say, okay, we're going to pick a song at random. We're going to give this a shot. And I just said, okay, there we go. For the first time listen for Sammy Hagar, the song Source of Infection, it starts out with a Ballroom Blitz kind of quote, you know, everybody ready? All right, fellas, let's go. Like that. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm on board. That's cool. But it turned out to be a fucking instrumental, more or less. It was more so like just a song to show off Eddie, and there was like some vocal pyro in there, but it was more so a showpiece for that. So I was like, oh fuck, okay, let's try this again. Spin the fucking wheel. Let's get another song. Feels so good. Okay, great. Not a problem. And I was like, this sounds exactly like what I expect from the Van Hagar era.
Yeah.
And it is objectively good. And it's hooky. And it in like this Phil Collins type of way where it's like so expertly written, but it doesn't feel like Van Halen. And I was like, all right, let me just try to say something nice. Let me try to find something nice to say about this era of the music. And I'm like, let me try another song. Black and Blue off of OU812. And I'm like, all right, this is just Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution by AC/DC. So it's been done before and it's been done better. And I'm like, fuck, I failed. But a song I'd never heard before from the Dave era was Hear About It Later. And it's his voice still sounded okay for Fair Warning, came out in 81.
Yeah.
His voice still sounded all right. And you can hear that there's starting to be the signs of wear on his voice when he's up in those higher registers. And I just don't think that, obviously he had his solo career after this with Steve Vai, but he could not sustain that level of performance for that much longer. So it makes sense why they wound up parting ways with him. You have to think that in part that was a major reason why, because if he can't keep up the intensity, if he can no longer hit those notes, now they're losing a major part of what made them Van Halen in the early days.
Yeah.
Chris, did you try to do one of these like first time listen experiments with them too, to see if you were giving each one of these guys a fair shot?
A little bit, you know, like I said, I grew up with 1984. I bought myself Van Halen 1 and Diver Down, so I was very familiar with those. But I hadn't really listened to a lot of Dave stuff like Van Halen 2, Fair Warning, Women and Children First. Like I hadn't listened to a lot of that, so I listened to some of it, and it was like I kind of realized why I hadn't heard a lot off of those albums, because it just it didn't quite reach the highs of a song like I'm the One, of a song like Hot for Teacher. Like I felt like some of the songs I was listening to from that Dave era, even though there's so much music that I do love, some of the songs I was just listening to at random didn't quite meet the highs. But even though I was more familiar with Dave, I felt like even though I was doing some of that, I tried harder with Sammy Hagar, because Sammy Hagar, I knew that there was 5 songs I loved with Sammy Hagar, and I never listened to anything else. So I did listen to Good Enough, and it kind of felt like I was saying before, that they were like, no, this is where you do your David Lee Roth impression of some ad-libs in there. Same with Source of Infection. Like you're saying, there doesn't really feel like there's a verse. It's just kind of Sammy yelling stuff as if he was David Lee Roth. So it felt different. But then when I did listen to Feel So Good, and yeah, that's exactly what Van Hagar sounds like. That's what the most popular Van Hagar songs sound like. Yeah. And like you're saying, I know the story I read is that David Lee Roth quit the band. He wasn't fired because he couldn't sing anymore. He didn't like the electronic direction that he was going in, so he quit the band. And I think in a way that helped Eddie, because now he had someone who could actually sing and kind of hit the notes they're supposed to hit. Because if he's getting more electronic, the music is getting more intricate, the harmonies become more important. You need to be able to consistently hit those notes. It's one thing when Eddie is playing the fuck out of his guitar, Michael Anthony is playing his bass, and David Lee Roth is a little flat or a little sharp while Michael Anthony is harmonizing with them. That's one thing, that's fun. But like David Lee Roth trying to sing a song like Dreams, he's not going to be able to consistently sing those notes. And so having Sammy Hagar come in, I think that's why some of the most popular Sammy Hagar songs are the songs that are the more electronic, the more catchy rock music, because that's what Sammy was good at. And that allowed Eddie to write songs in that style, which seemed like a style he was becoming more interested in.
Yeah.
So because it was, when you're that fucking good at playing the guitar, it is kind of like, well, where do I go from here? Like it's Eruption was the second song I ever recorded or was ever released. Like I hit my peak on the second song we ever released. Like, where do you go from there? And he just expanded his repertoire of including synths and keyboards and building this elaborate recording studio in his home so that he could experiment even more. And Sammy's ability to sing consistently, he can consistently hit the right notes every time. That allows Eddie to write music in that style. And so I think that's why with the Sammy era, the music I listened to, it was either good, catchy rock music or pathetic attempts to recapture what made David Lee Roth so good. So it's I tried to listen to a mix. I tried to listen to stuff that I hadn't heard from either of them, but there's a lot of really good Van Halen songs that I've already heard that it almost felt like I've already heard the best that they have. It's like there's no more hidden gems for me to find. Like I've already found them all. It's because there's so many Van Halen songs that I do like. I've found all the really good stuff, so it was hard for me to find something else that really stood out in a good way. Things kind of only stood out in a bad way.
Yeah. Doing this episode, I had it in my mind constantly. I finally understand your stance on Cannibal Corpse. I felt very much like, oh, I understand now why Chris cannot really get into the Corpse Grinder era of Cannibal Corpse. Because it's the same. Like for me, it was like, I should like this. Yeah. A majority of this makes sense. The direction that they went in, they'd already started to dip their toes in with David Lee Roth. So I should like the later stuff. I should like the Van Hagar era. But I just couldn't get with it because the music did change. The feel did change. The dynamic did change. So in a lot of ways, this episode gave me more respect for your stance in our Corpse Grinder versus Barnes episode, which prior episode. Check it out. It's a fan favorite. Yeah, it it really opened up my eyes to be like, okay, I'm not just being pretentious. I'm not just being stubborn. There is something different that does not, to quote Marie Kondo, it does not spark joy. Chris, this was an episode that I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. And I would say that this was a pretty successful head-to-head. I'm happy that we now have, 3 of these under our belt?
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is really exciting. And we want to hear from you guys. If you enjoy these head-to-head episodes, then we want to do more of them. So maybe even suggest some for us. Much like the suggestions that we're hoping for from listeners, Chris, why don't you give us your suggestion for this week's episode?
So, first, I just want to discuss, like we said, we did this head-to-head, and I do consider myself someone who is on the David Lee Roth side of the argument, but I do have an appreciation for a lot of the Van Hagar music, or at least some of the big hits. And so, even though I've spent a lot of time talking about David Lee Roth, how much fun he is, Van Halen 1 has a lot of great songs. 1984 has a lot of great songs. There's a lot of great music to listen to from David Lee Roth, so I definitely recommend checking that stuff out. But the specific song I want to recommend is off of 5150, the first album with Sammy Hagar. That's the song Why Can't This Be Love?
Okay.
We have talked a lot about David Lee Roth's, ad-libs and whoops and yells and all this and that.
He's like fucking R2-D2.
And we've also talked about how Sammy Hagar seemed like he kept trying to do it and wasn't doing it nearly as well as David Lee Roth. But in the song Why Can't This Be Love, right before the second chorus, he lets out this great woo! And I've always loved that. And I've always loved that. And it is a catchy song. It has a catchy chorus. It's a little bit slower. It's a Van Hagar ballad, exactly the type of music you don't like. But it's a song I really like, and I wanted to point out that as much as there are things that Sammy does different from Dave and Dave does different from Sammy, there is something in this song that made me feel like, you know what? That's him doing something that Dave did, but it works. This time it works.
Yeah.
And I think some of the other songs almost sounded like it was being forced, but this just sounded like it naturally came out of Sammy before hitting this, I think it's the second or third chorus, so it's later in the song, and it's kind of this idea, asking the question, why can't this be love? He is kind of like, well, yeah, why not? And he's just kind of letting this woo come from him, and it's cool, and plus, it's a good song, so that's why my recommendation is the song Why Can't This Be Love off of 5150.
All right, fuck all that. No. So, yeah, I really did try this episode, and I am proud of myself for giving Sammy Hagar way more of a chance than I ever have before. And, this podcast has always been about trying to open yourself up and stay open-minded and allowing yourself to find new music that you might be into that you wouldn't have given yourself a chance to if not for just dropping whatever preconceived notions. But in trying so hard, I'm still firmly in camp Dave. I fucking love David Lee Roth. I love that era of Van Halen. And Van Halen 2 is one of my favorite albums ever. And a standout track on that album, which, God, it just brings a smile to my face every time I hear it, is the song DOA. Holy shit. It starts out with these eruption-style big chords into just this monster of a riff, and I just absolutely love it. And just the chorus is big, and just the dead or alive, and all the harmonies and everything. It's so good. It's Dave being Dave. It feels slinky, it feels sleazy and greasy, and it's, like I said, it's just guys having fun. I fucking love it. And I want you all to check this song out too. Check out the song DOA, Dead or Alive, off of Van Halen 2. Thanks for tuning into the Scrap Metal Podcast. The time has come for us to pack up our gear, but we'll be back to rock out with you in the next episode.
Stay metal, everyone.
Good